The front line. Men fire at sounds. Japs are believed to have used that hut. Machine gun bullets search for any seeking escape. It's a grim business of man against man. Kill or be killed. Coming out after 6 weeks in contact with the enemy, battle-scarred militia troops who have upheld the proudest traditions of the Australian Army. They have suffered fearful privations, fighting day and night. Their casualties have not been light, but they've carried on. This is war, the real thing. The utter weariness of sorely tried men is evident in their faces, but they've won their spurs. Quietly they accept praise for the job they've done, but they don't forget the cobbers who did not come back with them.
Hello podcasters, welcome to another episode of Living History, and let me thank everyone for the huge support you've given to the podcast. We've only been going 4 months and already we've been nominated for an award. It's fantastic, the Australian Podcast Awards. So thank you so much. That's all thanks to you guys and the wonderful support you give to the podcast. So if you'd like to vote for us, and please do because it would really be great to win an award, please visit our Facebook page. You'll see all the details there about how to vote for us in the Australian Podcast Awards. Now, today's episode of the podcast, a really quite emotional one. I had the huge privilege of going and speaking to a gentleman by the name of Reg Chard. And Reg is a Kokoda veteran. He served throughout the Second World War in the Pacific, mostly in Kokoda, firstly at Milne Bay, and then during the Kokoda Campaign, and then at the beachhead campaigns of Kokoda and Sanananda. So he was in the thick of the fighting in New Guinea, and it was a real privilege to sit down with him and hear him tell his story. He's 95 years old, but he doesn't seem like it at all, and you won't believe it when you listen to him how sharp his memory is and how well he can convey the emotions of being involved in that very heavy fighting in New Guinea. So it's really wonderful to speak to Reg. I really invite you to sit down and listen to this. It's something that I'm sure will stay with you for a very, very long time. It's quite emotional, it's confronting in parts, but it's a really important story, and we're really lucky we still have a very small number of people around who were there to experience these battles firsthand and to share their memories. So I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy probably isn't the right word because, as I said, some parts of it are quite harrowing, but it's an important story. So let's hear from Reg Chard about his experiences in World War II.
A date which will live in infamy.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor-General.
There's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terrorist attack.
This was our finest hour.
Reg, it's a real honour to be sitting here talking to you about your experience in World War II. You told me you were 95. You're turning 95. I couldn't quite believe that. You don't look anywhere near that old.
Well, I'm inside, believe me.
It's always a great pleasure to talk to veterans who were there during these campaigns. So why don't we start? How did you end up being in the army during the Second World War?
Well, in 1936, I was apprenticed to a baker and pastry cook, and I had 5 brothers, and they were all a lot older than me. There was roughly 3 years between each brother, and they all joined up, and of course I was the last one to. So I said to my mother, as soon as I turn 18, I'm going to join the army. So I joined the army on the 17th of November 1941. I turned 18 on the 31st of October, so I didn't wait too long. I went up to Bathurst till Christmas. And then at Christmas time, all the men was up there, was sent down to Greta. And this is when they formed the 2nd 55th Infantry Battalion. And they brought up a lot of conscripts. Not that it made difference who they were, because they all died the same. They all had the same colour blood. So there was a lot of us in the AF, and it was the first battalion ever to have the two mixed together. And it didn't mean a thing. So we went away in early May. We went out on a ship called the Taruna. The first morning was at sea. The Taruna she was pretty quick. She used to go up the Derwent River, carried passengers and picked up fruit, apples. It was flat bottom, that was the only thing, because it was pretty rough ride. And the first morning what they did is they lined us all up on the deck, cut all their hair off, like it is today. And the next thing, was down the stern of the ship all lined up, and the tuna was about 25,000 tonnes, so it was rather a large ship in those days. Anyway, the word went down, they're throwing cameras overboard. You got no idea what they used to do. So I had a 120 Kodak, which was about 8 inches tall and about 3 inches wide and about an inch thick. So I shoved it in my felt hat. So anyway, my officer came down. His name was Bill Ryan. He played rugby league for Australia in the second row. And he said, "You've got a camera?" And we didn't realise at the time there was a joker leaning behind me against the cabin. Anyway, he was dressed in civilian clothes. Anyway, he said to me, when we get where we're going, we had no idea where we're going. Some said India, some said Burma, so nobody had any idea. And he said, "I'll look after all your films for you." And I said, "Oh, yeah, who are you?" And my name's Damien Parra.
The great war photographer. My God.
Yeah, so him and I became great friends. So he stopped with our battalion for about 4 months. And what he did when we got up there, he got me a tin about as big as your microphone, or whatever you call that one in front of you, and about 4 inches wide, and he filled it with tea. And of course, I always asked, I said, "Dame, what's the tea for?" And he said, "It'll dry all the moisture out, keep your films dry." So as soon as I took them, I put them in there, and then I gave them to him, and then he sent them back home in his diplomatic pouch. So I've got all these photos, and what I try to do is take pictures of all the men first. So I've got all these pictures at home. And so when we landed in New Guinea, the first thing you know is you walk off the ship, the heat is just unbearable. And everybody, as I walked down the gangplank, was gasping for breath because you just couldn't breathe. It took about 3 days or so to get used to it. And we'd no sooner landed and there the Japanese started bombing Port Moresby. They'd come over just like clockwork every day. They'd got about 30,000 feet and the AK guns could only reach 19, so they had just wasting their time. And we were unloading ships of a daytime first, and the Japanese sank one of the ships, we call the McDewey, still laying in Bootless Bay up in Port Moresby. And so then we started unloading by night time. We did everything. We were infantry. So all of a sudden MacArthur gets the bright idea that he wants to build an airstrip down at Milne Bay, which is the furthest point. It's like going down to Melbourne and going to Wilson's Peninsula.
Wilson's Promontory,
Promontory?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, it's the same thing up there. When you go to Milne Bay, that's the furthest point you can go in New Guinea. So we went down there on our own. There was 120 of us sent down there. The biggest thing we had was a Bren gun. And was told when we were ready to go that we were expendable. All the ministers and the rabbis, etc., all come up and blessed us, etc. And we was down there for 3 months on our own. And in the meantime, 19 American Seabees come from America. They're like well, in Australian name they call them pioneers. They're all tradesmen, like engineers and carpenters, etc. And they brought a small bulldozer with them. And that was the first one I've ever seen in my life. We didn't know what it was when they unloaded off the ship. And what they did is, Milne Bay was owned by Lever Brothers, a big plantation. It was all palm trees. They used to get copra. So what they did the first morning they were there, they just put the little bulldozer out. They just knocked the strip straight through, just like a pathway. So in the meantime, the Japanese planes used to come over and strafe us every day. We never knew when they'd come because Milne Bay was just like Sydney Harbour, and they'd come in from through the head side, and you never knew they'd come. They'd come in from the ocean, and they killed a few of us, every day because we couldn't get away quick enough. And this come in that low that you could see the Japanese pilots sitting looking at you, laughing at you, because we had nothing. By the time they were going about 360, 380 miles an hour, so by the time you got your rifle up, they were gone. So we finished the strip, and they brought in 18 Kitty Hawks, the first real fighter planes we'd ever seen. They were led by Paddy Finucane, Bluey Truscott, who was a very famous Australian airman. He was in the Battle of Britain, and Johnny Jackson. Now, later in the campaign, Johnny Jackson won a Victoria Cross, but the Japanese captured and he was beheaded. They were all killed by Bluey Truscott up there in Milne Bay. So the Japanese, when they landed, they only thought there was 120 men, plus the Americans that was there. But they didn't realise that at night time, somebody had a genius of an idea. They were bringing up fresh troops who'd just come back from the Middle East, from North Africa, And they'd come over night time, they'd just go straight in the jungle. So there was 5,000 of them. And the Japanese, instead of landing a huge, like 20,000, they landed 2,000 Marines, Japanese Marines. And they had 3 tanks. Now, those tanks ended up, was on one side of the airstrip and they was on the other. And these 5,000 were still in the jungle. The general, his name was, at that time he was a colonel, Colonel Clues. He left them in the jungle. He wouldn't bring them out at the last minute. And they told the Kitty Hawks to go back to Port Moresby just in case we couldn't hold them. And so the next morning he brought out these 5,000 troops, so we just started pushing them all the way back. And we slaughtered most of them.
Was that your first experience of combat, Reg?
That was their first lot.
What? Tell me about some of the things you remember from that battle, because this is an iconic Australian battle when we defeated the Japanese at
Well, that
Milne
was
Bay.
the first time they'd ever been defeated on land. They were very brutal. I'll tell you who they were. The Japanese invaded China in 1937, and I don't know if you've heard of the rape of Nanking. In 5 weeks, they raped 5,000 young ladies and young girls, and in the same period, they killed 15,000 Chinese men, women and babies, day-old babies. They just threw them against the wall so they'd have to shoot them. And these are the people who were fighting against New Guinea, so they were brutal, and they continued right throughout the whole campaign. We never, ever took any prisoners. We never felt sorry for anybody. So Milne Bay, when we pushed the Japanese back, they were really brutal. They just wouldn't surrender. They didn't believe in surrender. They'd sooner die first. That was supposed to be an honour for them.
So what was your personal experience like at Milne Bay? Like when did you first see a Japanese soldier?
Well, when they landed a good enough island, and they came it's just like landing here and coming around towards the microphones. We knew they were coming, and there's nothing you could do about it because whereas we would go in, my battalion never fought as a whole battalion till nearly 6 months later at Sanananda. We was fighting in companies, 120 men at a time. So every time we were going into battle, it would be 120, and you might be fighting against 2,000 Japanese, so you had no hope. They just shove you backwards. And if you killed them, didn't matter how many you killed, they were like ants. The more you killed, they said to just come from nowhere. But you got no, the longer you stop in battle, you've got no feelings, and you've got no pity for anything. I mean, you could be right next to me and you're my personal mate and you'll be killed, and I just look and think, poor bastard, and that's it. Nothing. But if you've got boots on and I haven't, I'll take your boots, or you've got something that I want, this is how you survive. So, as I said, you've got no feelings. The longer you're in battle, you become just like a zombie in the end. You've got no feelings, no nothing. You don't think of anything. All you think of is kill, 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 because that's all you do. And when we pushed the Japanese back, they got a couple of destroyers and got out to sea, and the Kitty Hawks come back and they sank one of the destroyers. And the next morning, we thought, oh, beauty, we'll have a rest here. And anyway, the HMS Swan, an Australian destroyer, pulled in, and they saw blokes from the 55th, what's left, get aboard the destroyer. So we got on the destroyer and they took us straight back to Port Moresby. The reason they took us back, because the rest of our battalion was up in the mountains, so we never ever saw them. By the time we got up there, they were too far forward. It's like going from Circular Quay and going up the Blue Mountains and just wandering around to try and find out between Blue Mountains and Lithgow. You got no idea where they are, so all you do is make sure you're alongside of Australia, and that's it. Up in the mountains, it was that bad. There was whole battalions, Japanese and Australian. You've only got to walk off the trail, which is about 18 inches or 2 feet wide. On one side, you've got the mountain, so you can't climb it. On the other side, you look down, you can drop down 8 feet, and you can drop down to 20,000 feet just straight over the side. And this is when men got sick, a single file the whole time. The most vulnerable person is the bloke at the front, because the Japanese are waiting for you to come, and the person at the back. Now, the person at the back, as you start to get sick, you start to wobble. And if you start to wobble and nobody notices it, because the one at the back, you just fall over the side and you're gone. Nobody ever looks for you. So what they worked out after a while, everybody, you just say, I'm at the back, and I think yourself, I've been here long enough, so I'll go up the front, and the bloke at the front will go to the back, and this is what they used to do. The whole campaign, everybody took turns at everything. But up in the mountains, the Japanese, we had no hope in the wide world because they landed 20,000 at Buna on the 22nd of July 1943. And as I said, they'd been fighting in China since 1937. So how I explained it to the school children as, okay, I always say to them, what class are you in? They say, well, just say 6th class. And I say, okay, you're in 6th class, you've been in school for 6 years, and I come in this morning, I'm in kindergarten. So you've got 6 years start on me, haven't you? And they say, yeah. I said, well, okay, the Japanese had 7 years experience on us. So we had to learn. If you didn't learn, you never saw the sun go down. So it's pretty hard learning curve. Most of our blokes were brilliant men. Some people were frightened. Some people couldn't care less, but everybody was different. But everybody did what they were supposed to do. So the Japanese pushed us back. They pushed us back to one company of the 39th Battalion. They were the first men to go up there. They were from Melbourne, the 39th Battalion. Most of them had been in camp about 5 weeks. And they just come to one morning and they said, now there's a movie of this in the War Memorial at Canberra, which they always show. And they just said to them, okay, fellas, how'd you like to go on a nice cruise? I don't never tell you where you're going because the bloke said, oh, yeah, right. They said, you take all your sporting gear with you, which they did. And on the film, they show you landing in Port Moresby with cricket bats, tennis balls, tennis rackets. They were the first men to come up against the Japanese who'd been fighting for 7 years, and these poor devils, and most of them learned to fire their rifles off the side of the ship going up there. Now, the ship was Aquitania, and in those days it was big. It was 42,000 tonnes. It pulled into Sydney and put the 53rd Battalion on, who weren't much better, and these were the poor devils who come up against the Japanese first, and because the Japanese just shoved them back, and they kept pushing them back and back and back, and our battalion joined in because no problem, still got pushed back, and people don't realise just how grim things were. Because if they'd have pushed us back, if those 6th and 7th Division hadn't arrived, we'd have finished up in the ocean. We just couldn't hold them. It's just no hope. I mean, it's like 2,000 men fighting against 20, and it's just, there's only one way it's going to go. And they had all the weapons. They've been fighting in the jungle for years, so they were very, very clever. We got pushed back, right back to Iribaya, and it's that high there, the Japanese could see Port Moresby Harbour where they had to go. But by this time, nobody had any idea what the jungle was like because nobody had ever been up there before. They'd starting to run out of food. They were getting all the diseases, some as we get, like you've got scrub typhus, you've got malaria. There's 3 different sorts of malaria. It was bacterial, malignant, and cerebral malaria. I had it 36 times before I got out of the army. It never goes away. It always stops with you. I also got scrub typhus. That's a terrible disease because you're unconscious for 14 days. Either you wake up or you just don't, and that's it. And 8 out of 10 died. So the Japanese got the same things, and unfortunately, the poor fuzzy Aussies, they got the same disease as what we did. So the Japanese, by the time they got to Iribaya, they were spent forces, the saying goes. So their general said to them, General Horry, okay, they never say retreat, they always just said about face, we'll go back where we came from. So they did, and by this time the 6th and 7th Division had come up, and of course they were very gung-ho what they were going to do, but once they struck the Japanese, they got pushed back also. But they were brilliant. If they'd have been on our side, we would have won the war much easier and quicker. So from then on we started to push them back very slowly and back over the mountains because we suffered terrible casualties. The worst thing is if you're up in the mountains, we had no doctors with us. If you got a machine gun burst in your tummy, that was the worst thing of the lot because you're going to die. And because when it first happened, the first time it happened with one of our chap, the first thing your dad do was pick him up because your tummy pops out. So you put him back down because the blood comes rushing out. You put him back down, push his tummy back in because then it's worse still. So terrible thing you had to do is if you were my mate and I got a tummy wound and we're being pushed back, you've got to make sure that when everybody goes that I'm not alive. So what they normally do is to put their rifle against your brain and pull the trigger and walk away. Because if they leave you, a lot of the Japanese went to American schools, they went through their colleges and their universities, especially their officers. They spoke perfect English. And just say, for instance, they captured me with a tummy wound. They'd ask me how many troops in front of them, what sort of weapons they had, what reinforcements behind them, etc., etc. And if you didn't answer them, because they wouldn't stab you in the heart, they'd stab you in the tummy, and of course, imagine what the pain was. So eventually you told them what they wanted to do, and as soon as they learnt what they wanted, they'd just behead you. So, and the youngest person that, I only tell you what I know, because as I spoke to you earlier, everybody up there, you could have two people either side of you, and each man either side didn't see what you saw, and you didn't see what they saw. So the youngest person that I knew was killed, his name was Joe Rourke, and he was 16 years of age the day he died, and he got one of these terrible tummy wounds. So he had to be put to death on his birthday. So, yeah, things got pretty tough. So then we started to push the Japanese back further and further, and well, some things I can't tell you because, we don't know who's going to watch it. So, but they were very, very cruel, and one thing they would do is chop you, just so they caught me, they'd chop my head off in the trail, as I said, it's only about 18 inches wide, and they'd stick my head the way you're going to come towards it, and of course, if you weren't experienced, you just race like madmen out, and of course they're sitting there waiting for you with their woodpecker machine guns, which is like our Vickers, and they'd have 3 or 4 of them, they'd just cut you to ribbons. So you had to be careful with everything. Even with a Japanese body, you didn't dare and turn it over because they'd have a hand grenade on it. So as soon as you kicked it and turned it over, the hand grenade would go off. So you had to be careful with everything all the time. So we pushed the Japanese all the way back to Buna, Kokoda and Sanananda. Now, there was no Americans up in the mountains whatsoever, but the 132nd Marine Division came in. They landed at the other side of Popondetta. And anyway, they were inexperienced and they had all their luxuries, and they used to smoke cigarettes, and of course, up in the mountains you can smell anything. And Japanese just, in one morning, they killed 500 of them. So our general, General George Vase, he told the American General, General Huggins, to take them back, get rid of all their luxuries, all their cigarettes, their ice cream machine. They had everything. Get rid of everything, train them for 5 weeks and bring them back again. So that's what they did. But in the meantime, we pushed the Japanese back, and they got back to their base in Buna and Kokoda and Sanananda, and we had to take the 3 of them.
Reg, what do you remember about that fighting at Sanananda? Because that was some pretty tough fighting there. What do you remember personally about the fighting there?
Well, the worst thing was the Japanese, they'd been there 6 months, and they'd fortified it all, and they were up on all high ground, and of course, up there's rivers everywhere, and of course, the rivers run into creeks, and the creeks run into swamps, and of course, when the Japanese are up high and you're down low, so at one stage there we was pushing through, you had to hold your rifle up over or your weapon up over your head. You're pushing through mud and slush up to sometimes your chest or your shoulder. Of course, the Japanese are sitting there waiting for it, just like you trying to get through that door and me sitting here with a machine gun. And they just cut us to ribbons. This is where we lost all our casualties. But as I said, you just got like a zombie, so you didn't sort of worry about anything.
How did you overcome that situation where the Japanese were dug in and you just had to attack them?
Just had to keep going forward. And what we used to do is we used to send out a scouting party every morning, which was consisted of, it all depends if you get enough men, 7. And every time 7 weren't out, the idea was to go out and just keep moving forward. And if they could find a little gap, they'd move forward as far as they would. Then one of the blokes would run back and say, okay, we've got a gap through here, send more troops up, so they'd sneak up. So they had a gap to start with. So the next day they might go a little bit further. But every time they sent a scouting party out of 7, 3 were never going to come back because the snipers were sitting in the trees waiting for you. And you could never see them because it's dark in the trees. So we got to Sanananda, and then that was the Kingpin, Sanananda. We took from, we started to attack them on the 7th of December at Sanananda, and it took us till the 22nd of January to dig them out of there. And that was where we lost a lot of our casualties. On the 7th of December, we got ready to attack them in the morning. The sun used to come up about 3:30 in the morning up in New Guinea, and we've found out over a period of time that your body is at the lowest ebb between 1 o'clock in the morning and 5. That's when everybody, means who you are, your body is exhausted, so that's when it gives out. So this is why you always hear people attacking at dawn. This is the reason why. And I'll tell you one little story. I was standing with Dick Caius from Ingleburn, and he and I were about the same age, and Alan Davidson from Dulwich Hill, and I was in the middle. And anyway, we never got any mail or anything for over 6.5 months, so all you had to do to talk about was each other's, your girlfriends or your mother or father, sister. So we knew everything about each other. I can even tell you his girlfriend's name today. Her name was Alma. Anyway, he said to me, Reg, if we get through this, because we knew this was the last once we'd finished the Japanese there, that was the end of that campaign, that we'd driven them right out of Papua New Guinea. He said, as soon as I go home, I'm going to marry Alma. And he said, I want you to be my best man. I said, yeah, fine, Dick, just like that. And anyway, he took one step forward. There was a sniper in the tree, put a bullet straight through his brain. He was dead before he hit the ground. And Alan Davis is on the other side, but he never moved. There must have been another sniper, and he put a bullet through his temple, and I'm standing in the middle. So that's how lucky, or whatever you like to call it, I don't know. The thing that carried me through, I had a violent temper, still have, when it comes up. And this is what sort of carried me through, because as soon as things went bad, I'd go to bananas. I had no feelings, no nothing, so I don't know. So whether I'm just lucky or most my father said only the good die young, see, so I suppose he's pretty right, that's it. So we tacked them, we pushed them back 100 yards in that morning, but it cost us about 300 men for that 100 yards. So. And it wasn't until the 21st of January 1943, I started to get really, really sick. I had malaria, and I didn't realise at the time they had scrub typhus. So I remember walking out the front line, and I don't remember anymore. When I woke up, I was back in 2nd 9th Australia General Hospital at Port Moresby. You're unconscious when you've got scrub typhus. So when I woke up, I must have been pulling. I thought to myself, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm a prisoner of war. And the bloke in the bed, he leant over, and I won't tell what he said anyway, so I stopped. And anyway, he sang out the sister, her name was Sister Ruth Campbell. She said, just lay there, Chard. I always call you by your surname. Lay there, Chard. She said, I'll come back there. So they pulled the stretcher out, and they put me on a bed because it was filthy dirty. And she washed me and cleaned my teeth, cut my hair, shaved me. She did everything for me. And so then I started to get better, and then I got malaria again. I kept getting malaria again. So they said, okay. And I didn't realise in the meantime that Sanananda had fallen the next day after I left. And she said to me, there's a hospital ship coming up to Katoomba. She said, it's for walking wounded only. And I said, well, I can't walk. She said, don't worry, I'll get you on the thing. She said, all I got to do is get you on the ambulance. Once you're on the ambulance, you're discharged. They've got to take you. So what she did, she got behind me, got two blokes, one either side of me, and they held my arms, because nobody could see me, I was in the middle, and she pushed me forward, and this is how I come home. And I spent 3.5 months in Concord here, and then I started to recover, and they sent me straight back to Milne. We were back to the Solomon Islands then. So that was my story. So in the Solomon Islands, only lasted about 3 months, and I started to get malaria real bad again. So there was lots more troops, etc. here. So the doctor said to me, why they ever sent you back? He said, I got no idea, but he said, you're going back home again. So they sent me back home, and I laid in Concord Hospital for nearly 13 months. The war was over, but I still, as soon as they stopped feeding me quinine after 14 days, the 15th morning, I'd start all over again. So they just kept feeding me quinine. And I said to the doctor, what's going to happen? He said, well, either your heart will give way, or he said, you'll start to get better. So I just started to get better. So I was very, very lucky, So, and I've been going with my wife since I was 16, and she wanted to get married before I went away, but my father was in the First World War, and he was in the 35th Infantry Battalion. He was in Gallipoli and Passchendaele, Jeeps. And he said, whatever you do, don't marry Betty. He said, because your life's going to be ruined. Don't ruin hers. So I didn't. And we got engaged when I came home the second time, and they let me out of here. Matter of fact, they drove me home in an ambulance on the 5th of October 1945. We got married on the 6th of October 1945. St Clement's Church at Marrickville. Went up to Jenolan Caves. I was up there one day, and when I woke up again, I was back here in Concord Hospital. That's the story of my life. And it still comes now, even today, but now it's in a different form. You know how they say how the flu changes its strains? Well, the malaria now has changed, and what it is now is just like a real bad dose of the flu. And sometimes you've got to go back to hospital, and sometimes you can just get over it. So that's my story.
It's an amazing story, Reg. How do you look back now on the war? I mean, what do you think all these years later, all these decades later? What do you think when you look back on the war?
Well, I think for what? All those lives lost, for what? Nothing. You know? And of course, the nursing sisters, I mean, we can't tell the nurses about what happened to them, but I mean, some of the things that have happened to those nursing sisters were just undescribable. Well, I can tell you one thing. These weren't nests, I won't tell what they were. When we come down out of the mountains, a lot of fuzzy wuzzies went to missionary schools, which is like a church once a week, and they taught them English and they taught them religion. And one of them, as we come down to the mountains, he came up to us, and there was 14 of us, and he said, there's 25 white ladies, and he pointed that way, and he put his finger up to the sun and pointed the sun going down. In other words, they were one day in front of us. And we'd already heard about these white ladies, and nobody could ever find them. So you just did what you wanted to do up there. You knew, what you were supposed to do. It was kill people, and that was it. So we just decided, okay, we'll go and find them. So when we did find them, they just went in the River Valley in September 2 years ago. So this part is nothing that people don't know about. These Japanese, we found, we come upon them, and there was 25 white ladies who had never told anybody who they were, and I'm the last one alive, so nobody will ever know who they were, what country they come from, and what they were. And when we found them, the Japanese would chop their heads off. They'd open them up from their crutch right up to their throats, and they hacked at their breasts. So we killed every one of them. It's the only time I ever used my rifle butt as a hammer, and we smashed and there was nothing left of them. We took their dog tags and threw them away as we went towards Sanananda, so nobody'd ever find them. The reason I was at a reunion one day at Canley Vale RSL Club, and a young lady from SBS, the television came up, and she said to me, most people say, what's the worst thing you ever did? And she sort of startled me. She said, what's the worst thing you ever saw? And before I realised, I blurted the story out. And she said, well, why won't you tell me who they were? And I said, well, you're a young lady. I said, now you could have had a grandmother, could have been, say, a nurse. And she said, yeah. I said, well, how would you like me to tell you that one of those could have been your grandmother? And she said, well, no. And I said, now you know the reason why we've never told anybody who they were. We couldn't do anything with their bodies. All we did was cover them up with branches or whatever we could find, and we reported them later on. So what happened to them, I've got no idea. And of the 14 men that attacked, we had one man with us. His name was Arthur Bullivan, and when I was 18, Arthur would have been in his 30s, and he was a conscientious objector. In other words, he didn't believe in killing or shooting anybody or harming anybody. And we said to him, what the hell did you join the infantry for? He said, I didn't. I joined to be a stretcher bearer. And as we didn't have any stretcher bearers, they just said to him, okay, you're in the infantry. So all the fighting we did, he never, ever fired a shot, but he'd do anything for you. But when we found these ladies, he went bananas, and he was killing everybody. And believe it or not, of the 14 men that went there, he was the only one that was killed. So I don't know if it was fate or what. But of course, that wasn't the only thing they did to the ladies, but that's all I'll ever tell anybody what they did. That was bad enough.
It's a terrible story. How do you look back on the Japanese today? What's your opinion?
Young Japanese, no problem at all. They're just like my wife and I had two sons, and one's 71 and one's 62. So the young Japanese are just like them. They weren't born, they don't know. But older Japanese, Ray will tell it, was here one day and was walking towards the rose garden there, and there was one old Japanese coming towards, and Ray said, what are we going to do? So I just put my hands up and I just sang out to him, oi, don't come any further, we don't want you here, please go back where you come from. He stopped for a moment, and then he turned and went. He might have been an innocent one, but we just didn't want anything to do with him. I've got no time for him. I've got nothing in my house belongs to Japanese, so that's only me. Everybody's different. Ray and I have never, ever been back to New Guinea. We don't want to go back. I don't march on Anzac Day. I don't go to any of those things at all because I just get upset. So it's better for me to stop away. And see, it just shows you how does it affect you. Okay, Ray, Roy and I, Roy's the oldest of us here. He's 97 on the 2nd of August and Ray's 95 in June and I'm 95 in October. Now we show a movie here. On this movie, it's only short, about 12, 14 minutes. It shows Sister Ruth Campbell, that nursing sister I'm telling you about. And she was brilliant. In 1942, people didn't realise all the nursing sisters were evacuated from New Guinea and her and 2 others refused to leave. And they were the only 3 white women in the whole of New Guinea during the war years, till late 1943. And my wife and I kept in touch with Ruth till 1984, and she came from Bundaberg in Queensland, and anyway, she passed away 2 days before Anzac Day, 1984. But a brilliant lady. And one thing I will tell you about most of the nursing sisters, when they went away, if they weren't married, they never ever married when they came home. And people say, why? And I'll say, okay, in hospitals at night time, they're just big tents, this big marquee tents. There might be 50 people in one tent, and there's always somebody dying of a night time. And it doesn't make sense whether they're 2 years old, 18 years old, or 80 years old. They all called after the same person. They all called after their mother. And of course, you know who became the mother? The nursing sister assistant. I hold their hand till they died. And, they might do this 2 or 3 times a night. So you just imagine how it did affect them. So when I got to know Sister Ruth Campbell real well before I came home the first time, I said to her, Ruth, why is it that everybody calls out for their mother? And she said, well, we've all got together, all the nursing sisters and the matron, and we think that what happens is when they're dying, they go right back to their childhood. They think of their mother. So that's that, sorry. When we show this movie, it's going to say how it's feeling. There's Ray, Roy and I. We've seen it 1 million times, and the 3 of us all just go up the back. And Roy always comes out with the same thing every time we show it. He'll look at it and he'll say, Jesus, don't they look young? If we do it 5 days a week, he says it's 5 days a week, so that's how it works out. So we all get upset, so that's nothing unusual.
It's understandable.
That's part of the plan, I think. Yeah.
Well, Reg, thank you so much. As I said, it's an important story, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Pleasure.